computer. Hey everybody, this is the final meeting for the Unicorn Project, and so all of us have wrapped up the book and discussing final thoughts. Anyone want to jump in as far as what they thought, the ending?
So I talked last week about, or maybe 2 weeks ago, about how I was hoping that Sarah was going to be redeemed because I thought, like, we're all on the same team. We're just not seeing it from her perspective. She was not redeemed. I have egg on my face. I was very wrong.
So I had read ahead and I knew, and I was totally holding my tongue when you were talking about that. I was like, oh my God.
It's weird because in part 2, it seemed like they were like trying to turn a page or like calm down, and then they just went at her in part 3, like just made her this terrible person. And then in the epilogue, it's like, oh yeah, she's kind of cool. I had lunch with her, and I was like, what happened here? Like, this is not consistent.
Yeah, I was a little surprised by that casual. Oh yeah, it was like one sentence. Oh, went to lunch. It was It was kind of just this weird meh sentence. It's like, I was surprising.
So she did go to lunch with her in the end. So I can't remember who bet which way, but yeah, she did go to lunch with her in the end.
Yeah, I don't know. In some ways, I feel like they did to Sarah what Sarah did to everyone else, and so it feels like this karmic justice. But at the same time, is that breaking the pattern, right? If people are she's the extreme example because she truly was not on the same team, and I don't think, like, I think what the arc of the book is that she didn't have the best intentions. There is no like way to interpret that, I would say, otherwise. But when this idea of like people screw up and then they lose their jobs, or they do something, they make a call and the call goes wrong and they lose their jobs, like, what I would have liked to see more of was them overcoming that stigma. And I felt like the whole way the Sarah thing played out kind of reinforced that happens in a good way because she was an extreme character, but like I would have liked to see that change.
Yeah, I thought it ended kind of abruptly. I don't know, that was my impression. Like, it's like, yeah, we just got really good, and that was it. I don't know, I just felt like they didn't, like you said, they didn't seem to resolve some of those core issues. They just said, yeah, they're fixed. We went on to fix everything.
Yeah, that's what's nice about fiction, right? They're just able to cut right to it. Everything's happy. Puppies and rainbows, and we're done. Like, that's obviously a lot of work and all the, but yeah, that's just the way it is, I guess.
Was anyone else sort of happy that the launch of the Black Friday deals didn't go without incident? Because like they did the pre-work and I just thought they were going to be like, oh, and Black Friday came along and everything was fine. And I was just like, I was really pleased when things still went wrong. And in fact, things that they couldn't immediately fix as well. So they had to find like weird resolutions for like ways of getting around those problems. I was really like impressed that, you know, it's like, again, fiction, very easy to go like, oh, we've done all the prep work, we've done, you know, we've scaled it out to 1%, we've submitted it to 1% of our customer base, we've tried, you know, anticipated some of the load, all this kind of stuff. The day it just went smoothly. But yeah, I was really pleased that it didn't, actually.
I was in the same boat. I kind of assumed it wasn't going to go smooth, to be honest, and it never does, right? But I guess what's kind of different is when they got to the Christmas holiday season, I think it was that smooth, right? Or it was very close, if I recall correctly. So it was just a delayed example, I guess. They're saying they learned their lessons.
Yeah, and I guess the fact it went wrong for Black Friday was like highlighting how quickly they could solve the issues because they had these cross-functional teams, and the fact that like everybody there all had the same goal, and it wasn't like, oh, I'll just submit a ticket to this siloed load of people. So yeah, it was good in that sense.
Yeah, quick resolution.
So most of my career has been like infrastructure, selling, servers, network router switches. And like what stood out to me in this book was like they just magically had all this infrastructure for their new initiatives. Like, and they mentioned cloud like one time, but it seemed very interesting for such a legacy organization that when they started to do their experiments, in the beginning, they're like, oh, we cobbled together some old equipment that we found that we stole from other orders. I think it was Eric who like had like his secret, what do you call it? Like his secret testing pods or something like that. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh, we're doing all this continuous deployment in Kubernetes and containers and blah, blah, blah. And they just took leaps and bounds the other direction. I thought it was, they glossed over it, obviously, because it would have just made it way more complex, but I found that pretty funny.
Yeah, I think they kind of mentioned the fact that like the recommendations engine type style stuff was being scaled out to the cloud. And there was a passing sentence somewhere that like, their cloud provider was going to be really happy with the amount of CPU usage that they've burned through in order to generate these recommendations, but that marketing didn't care because they'd had the best day, ever. But yeah, it was really just in passing. Like it wasn't like very minor story point, like all this infrastructure just magic out of nowhere, the cloud. It's all there.
Yeah, exactly. And of course it works with all the legacy that exists with no interaction or no planning.
Yeah, I was less than satisfied after reading the book. Ben, I see.
I agree.
Ooh.
What do you think it was that left you wanting more?
I think it just felt kind of rushed. Like they just kind of glossed over things and like things suddenly happened, or like there were a lot of like they injected a ton of platitudes, but there wasn't this sort of crafted journey that was very prominent in the Phoenix project, of like just sort of moving through like it was just, I don't know, like we just got dropped in a certain place and they would time skip. And like a good time skip can be really effective, but it was like, it felt like it was happening a lot. And then just like things like, I was gonna ask you about this later, but like they mentioned like ETL and like data pipeline, but it was like one paragraph. And it was like blew through it. And then they're like, okay, we got data working. And then they're like, they moved on. And I was like, huh, what's going on? So yeah, it was like almost too technical at some points where it's just like threw a bunch of terms out and then it was kind of narrative. And it was like a little bit disjointed. I don't know.
Yeah, I agree.
Rushed.
It was very, very name droppy, and like, I mean, it's kind of, I would say that the author kind of overdid it, but I don't know. It is what it is. The one thing I thought that was kind of interesting, and this is just a bias being on the front end, they just said whatever the newest framework was, whereas like every other domain, at least in my memory, it was kind of like they would name drop something, right? They would name drop something specific, and in that case they didn't. And I was like, oh, that's just kind of interesting. Again, there might be a huge
bias. They specifically avoided that. They just like dodged that bullet. I don't know.
Yeah, I think they probably were like the latest web framework. Oh, we'll just write React. Oh, should we? Yeah, that exactly. Seems like it's tying it to a very specific point in time. Because like once upon a time, they would have been like, Bootstrap. Can you imagine reading that now? It would be like,
everywhere else though.
It's very contemporary, but like if, and this is kind of like another layer to the authors, like if they know they want to, is this just a total kind of moment in time, or it could be the same story and they just swap out all those pieces, right? But obviously we don't know how much technology is going to change in 10 years, but you can very easily see that a lot of those things can be swappable. So if the author actually wanted to, do version 2 or something like that, that they kind of set themselves up a little bit for that, but I doubt that's actually what they're going for.
There was one name drop that I thought they could get away with, and that was the Spark and Hadoop stuff. And that was because they kind of said that they created their own thing that was a bit like what Spark was, and that's why then Hadoop and Spark came along. And so it was kind of more of a historical, this is how these particular technologies were created and where they stemmed from, rather than like specifically like name dropping Spark, which was interesting. I'm interested to see if Emily thinks there was enough data in there.
No.
No, I didn't think there would be.
That's Okay, so the book ended up on my radar because a website that I follow in the data space that does a lot of like data ops thought leadership was pushing it, and they're like, oh, we're going to do an interview with the author, like this book is all about data ops, blah blah blah. Pooey. The book was not about what I wanted it to be about, which is fine. Like, it was good, it just wasn't what I thought it was going to be. But in general, I felt like there were a lot of qualities of a sequel in this that I really didn't love. The technology name dropping one, like, it felt weird that they didn't name a front end framework because they named specific technologies everywhere else. And so if they wanted to not put it in a point in time, like, pick one or don't. Just like the way things all end in this, she got a promotion sort of way, like, this, it felt like a sequel.
I want to read the Emily book of data ops. That's what I want to read next. Like, so if you just start writing that would be really good.
I'd read it too. Yeah.
Between all my meetings.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, I was hoping for like a Phoenix project, but from the spin of data, like that would have been really interesting. And I know I would have learned a lot, because I felt like that's how I learned a lot from Phoenix project, because I'm more on the front end side. So it was interesting seeing some of the problems we don't commonly deal with. But like this, I feel like they're just trying to cover so much of software engineering, which we all know is like freaking huge. So it's just like, he just like gives a little nod to each specialty, but that was not satisfying. Like pick one and stick with it. That's what I would have wanted.
I don't know. I think I like this side of it. Like for me, I guess also in sales, right? It does kind of jumble together, right? So I thought the viewpoint was really good. The data part I could take or leave, and it didn't happen. So it didn't even come on my radar that it was kind of supposed to be there. The fact that she joined the data team, I thought was, interesting. Like, okay, where's this going to go? Like, I thought we were solving the Phoenix project, and then all of a sudden she's on like this back end data warehouse team. But I guess it was more about software development and CI/CD and DevOps or whatever. So I accepted that portion of it. Actually, it's been a little bit. So like feeling the full resolution of the Phoenix project, like the application and everything, I don't even remember exactly how that came out, but they didn't celebrate it. It's what I remember.
Did you feel like the Phoenix project part of it came to a resolution? Because I didn't.
That's what I was saying, but I was trying to remember. I was trying to see if my memory was just bad, if I was just not remembering it completely, because it felt rushed at the end, and it was like, okay, we're doing CI/CD, yay, this was great. We had some great deployments, and then like, the Phoenix project went well. I think is kind of how I remember it ending, but with not a lot of explanation.
Does anyone else kind of feel like that maybe the Phoenix project and the Unicorn project are actually less about ops and dev, and actually they're much more both about company culture in a weird way, because they're really about working practice and how particularly siloed groups interact with one another. And that's not necessarily, it is related to dev and it is related to ops, but it's actually about working practice and culture really, rather than those specifics. You can apply it to anything.
I don't disagree. I would agree that it's a company culture thing, but I would make the case that an organization shifting to DevOps is a change in company culture, or requires a change in company culture.
Agreed. And speaking as someone who interacts with customers and clients on a daily basis, that can sometimes be the biggest hurdle to overcome. It's challenging. A lot of people think that, you have something in place that does X, Y, and Z, and that means it will work that way. But you actually have to shift the way you're thinking and stuff as well. And I think that's what these books to me resonate with, is actually that the company is willing to accept a new way of working. It's challenging when they don't. I'll say that.
Yeah, they definitely highlighted some of the big cultural things that needed to happen. I'm trying to remember back in Phoenix Project. Phoenix Project had some. It was more about shifting the way they work and not necessarily about tools. And then Unicorn Project was the same, but they did highlight tools way more, right? I don't know. Is that maybe that's a point in time bias? Like now that I work for a tools company, it's like this resonated more for me.
I think I would agree with that. And then I think Phoenix Project, because it was much more leadership like, I think that was interesting too, because it was about like the directors, the chief executives. This one obviously was more of the software engineer perspective, which I think maybe why like as like a software engineer, it was just like a little. That's why I think it was a little lacking, because I wanted to like connect with one persona well, but they just kept jumping. And then they would inject like technical things. Like the one quote that bothered me in this one was, "They're careful because a mistake in the HTML can break the website as thoroughly as any code change." And I'm like, I love HTML, but like if your HTML is that brittle, like HTML is supposed to be super resilient, and you're saying that like it's as drastic as changing something on the data pipe, like okay, that's stretching it a little bit, like
That div has way too much responsibility.
yeah,
If
I was
that's
like,
the case.
what the heck? I was like, oh my gosh, like, what's wrong with their front end?
Yeah, I'm interested. Derek, you haven't read the Phoenix Project, have you?
Correct.
So are you now planning on reading the Phoenix Project?
I have it. I have it back here. Just a matter of time, right?
I was wondering whether or not the Unicorn Project had instilled some sense of urgency to go and read the Phoenix Project, or whether you were left thinking that yeah, I'll get to it at some point.
So I'll say yeah. So the latter, not the urgency. I can.
Okay. Yeah. I unfortunately, yeah, I can understand where you're coming from on that one. I think the Phoenix Project is a much better book, though.
Yeah, I will say it was a better read if you decide to skim it, like just to check it out. I think it was a better read.
+1.
So I'm gonna throw a plug in for my issue that I created and I put in there. Emily, you're on mute.
Oh, I said I saw that and it looks so good. I've been checking the doc.
So Todd endorsed it. He said he wanted to make sure it happened. So I hope we do it. I hope we put some. I'd like to see it kind of gated, right? Like get customers to sign up, but we can promote it, and maybe we can even do some kind of joint events with authors or hand out signed copies or something like that for marketing events.
I just pasted the link in the chat for anyone who wants to take a peek. But yeah, I think this is a super awesome idea, Brad. So +2. Since I already gave out +1.
Yeah, so need all your help and putting the feedback in there, kind of creating that story.
Oh, cool. Yeah, like that sounds like a really cool idea. Sorry, just having a read through the issue now.
The question that I have for y'all is, like, is this a book you would recommend? Is the Unicorn Project specifically a book you'd recommend?
Yes, and I have, specifically to some customers, because I still think it has a lot of value. I don't think it's as good as the Phoenix Project, but it still has a place. Like, and it does tackle a different problem. So yeah. Would I say it's as good as the Phoenix Project? No.
I don't know if I'd recommend it, but Simon, to your point there, yeah, in terms of, so I just remembered, like I had this feeling a little bit more like maybe it was the first, we split this reading into like 3 parts or whatever, maybe the first part, second part, but I remember having more like, oh yeah, a previous company, which shall remain nameless here, I guess, like had a lot of those things where I was like, oh, I feel that pain, like maybe more so because I've experienced it or whatever, or know that was kind of the culture, that type of thing. So from that standpoint, I think it's at the very least eye-opening for someone who's still in that situation, that there are, it's just like obviously it's still fiction, but it's like an exposure to that there is a totally different way to do things. So I think that in itself is valuable. Whether or not that book needs to be the way to learn that, I don't know.
So when you're in that culture, are you self-aware that that's the problem, or do you think reading this book would then highlight that?
I think if you're in that culture, then I don't think you are self-aware, and I think reading the book could help for some people. But I think in the some other cases, people are self-aware. They know they need to change, but they just don't know how.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's both. It's definitely both. And
I
don't want things to change, right? Simon, to your point earlier, you mentioned like you've recommended the book to, some of the people you work with, and change is hard. Like it's a very real thing. And it's easy to say top down, let's change. We know we need to change at like the C-suite or E-suite level or whatever. Like that's all nice and dandy, but like in terms of implementers and everyone adopting that, and like, that's hard to get any number of people to like go towards a change. So that's just
the Unicorn Project and the Phoenix Project both do sort of bottom up changes. It starts off with these kind of renegade groups at the bottom level changing something. They get highlighted because they're excelling at what they're doing, and then it gets adopted further up. There isn't really very many stories in here about something coming in from the top going down, other than negative things, like things like being forced upon them, like the launch of the Phoenix Project before it's ready. But yeah, I mean, change can come from either direction. But yeah, these books generally only cater for like the bottom up strategy. What I would say is I have found the Unicorn Project much easier to relate to than the Phoenix Project. I have been in situations in this book numerous times, whereas I can't say honestly, hand on heart, that I've been, in a data warehouse, like trying to find some pieces of hardware to like bolt together to chuck into a rack just so that I can get another piece of server instance up and running. That isn't something that I could relate to in the Phoenix Project book. Whereas there's numerous examples of coding issues and like developer problems in here that I can definitely relate to. So I would say it's more relatable for me. But yeah,
the inverse for me. But that's funny.
Yeah, I was going to say, but I guess it depends on your background. So engineering background versus infrastructure background.
I do like the fact that at the end he does give a small nod to like the fact that design is a critical part to like the success of a product. But again, it's like one line where basically like she goes to a conference, she's like, oh, design is something we're gonna have to like standardize here, the way we do development. But that was at least nice to see.
He's probably leaving it for his next book.
Oh god.
A design book. Okay, I think project names, re-UXing the whole thing.
Well, he probably is running out of animals because there were so many new project names introduced in this book. Panther, or whatever the other one was.
Yeah, Panther, Nohol. Oh my god, they just
I guess
keep
it
on
the Dragon Project because it's design.
We talk about naming a lot at GitLab, and I didn't realize how important it was, but like really descriptive names are useful. Like the Narwhal Project doesn't mean anything, but saying like the team to improve SMAO is a very specific thing that tells everyone what you're doing. And if you want to talk about like getting everyone on the same page, I never realized how important naming was. I was in a meeting the other day where I even wrote this down because I really liked it, where Sid said something along the lines of like, if you want to get everyone on the same page, you start by agreeing on what something's called, because that forces you to name the definition, to give a definition. I'm looking for the exact verbiage, but now
I do quite like having a weird, wacky name to rally around, though, in a weird way. But so long as, yeah, I think I think if you without the team names, regardless of what the team names are, it's very hard to like rally around a certain.
Agreed. I just think that descriptive names are more useful than rah names. Also because they communicate to everyone else what you're working on.
Yeah.
I think maybe that's the key, though, is that like at the beginning with a lot of these skunk work projects, it's not being communicated because it's supposed to be basically secret. And then the key thing is, to Emily's point, once it gets larger and you're trying to be transparent, then it's time to graduate from the code names to something more transparent.
I mean, I would argue that Phoenix was actually quite a good name for a project because it was about like bringing, rebirthing something from the ashes, basically. And like, I kind of quite like that as a name, and it kind of does in one name kind of signify what they're actually intending to do. But yeah, agreed. When it becomes like more of a company-wide project and a bit more well-known, then you should probably drop the weird and wonderful names.
So I was in a customer meeting, and this is before I started Unicorn Project, and they said they were talking about the challenges that they had and that they don't do a lot of testing. The typical GitLab kind of sales meeting, like, yeah, we have problems, we're trying to improve, do more testing, do this, and it all, and it really came from the Phoenix project. And I was like, and I kind of looked at them, and they were referring to their own project. They had called their project the Phoenix Project, and it's like, wait a second. So you're having these challenges and all these things, the exact challenges that are in the Phoenix Project you're having, and you called your project the Phoenix Project? Well, it turns out they were actually moving their data center to Phoenix, so they called it the Phoenix Project. And that was what they were having. But I thought it was interesting that they picked the name, but they named it after the city.
Makes a lot of sense.
I
mean, like, you could argue, like, why do we have a tanuki as a logo? Japanese raccoon dog doesn't necessarily. It just is.
A backstory I've seen before, and now I can't remember.
There is a backstory. I mean, the original tanuki image was terrifying, quite frankly, but.
Yes.
Sid expanded on it recently. I happened to jump on one of his like new hire AMAs or something, and they asked it. He expanded on what it was. I don't think I exactly remember his word for word, but something about like an investor created the first logo, and then you're on mute again, Emily. And they had to go like ask permission because they didn't want to offend the investor. Like, hey, we kind of think your logo is really weird and scary, but like you're giving us money, so we should probably be nice about this. I thought it was great.
That's pretty funny.
That's what it was. That's where I saw it, was a new hire AMA.
Much improved now, for sure.
Yeah, it's a little bit less scary now. Yeah.
So any other takeaways? Like, I'm curious. Okay, you read the book. We finished it now. What, if anything, about the way you do your work is going to change?
That's a tricky one.
I was going to say have sympathy for the Sarahs of the world, but no, lesson learned.
No.
Apparently, according to Maggie, maybe if she had been on the right team, she would have been a huge asset. Yeah, it's just interesting that she has like a one-liner that like flips the vilification that they've been doing the whole like part 3. I don't know.
I think there's a huge amount of trust at the end between colleagues in the teams, knowing that, like Maxine's just like, there's a point where something goes wrong and she's like, do you know what? They've got it. Like, I trust them. They've got it. They know what they're doing. So I guess if there's something, not to be learned, but I think there's something that I would love to encourage more is actually like, trust fellow employees with, that they know what they're doing, and just let them get on with it and try not to hinder them as much as possible.
Yeah, let the professionals be professionals. That's what you hired them for, essentially. So, and again, I think this book, so it won't totally answer your question, but in the past, had I read this book in a particular situation I've been in the past, that might have sped up me, trying to make changes internally or to move on or something. But right now, that's definitely not the case.
I think for me, it's tough, like to Derek, but like the book kind of insinuates that like if you don't have leadership's back, you basically do a Hail Mary that might get you all fired, but if it works out, you're gonna be great. So I don't know, it's kind of hard because I would say, I think it wasn't this line, but like you put any individual in a toxic environment, the environment usually wins out. And I know the book, like to do like a hoorah kind of thing, like they want you to root for the small dog, but like it does seem like in a lot of toxic cultures that this would never actually work. Like most of the time, this would fall flat on its face. And yeah, I don't know. Because I've seen a lot of people burn out from the tech industry because they tried something like this and it just completely.
Yeah, in reality, do you think that Maxine would have actually kept her job? In a lot of places, I actually think she would have got fired for doing stuff like that.
Right.
That's the sad truth, isn't it? You know, covert operations being run without approval, you know.
Spending budget without approval.
It worked out, but yeah, I think there's a lot of companies out there that actually you could lose your job for doing something like this. So, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's the wrong thing to have done in the first place. But
right.
See, I think Maxine, no, I think now most people just quit. But like she was already polishing her resume from the first page, right?
Yeah.
So like I think she just would have quit or maybe been pushed out. But yeah, I think that the leaders of the rebel and all these other things, yeah, that would have probably been shut down, would be my guess.
Was anyone else that really, really pleased that they managed to rehire William back? I was like, that was not his fault. Like everything that just hit the fan and he got fired, it was like, poor guy. Like there's so many times where, you know, that does happen. It's like, they managed to get him back, but I was pleased with that.
Say that if you were William, would you go back? That's what I was thinking. I was like, I'm not sure I would go back to a place and like.
Yeah, I guess on the promise that, you know, things had changed.
Yeah, I guess so.
Maybe, but yeah, you're right. I guess, yeah.
It's like going back into like a toxic relationship. Like, am I really gonna give him a second chance? Like, I get it.
We've all
it's
done
also
it.
The narrative, and I agree though. It was a feel good. I would say that.
This is kind of random, but we haven't talked about this, but like the core versus context piece, even though it was obviously in the context of downsizing in some form, essentially. But I thought that that concept was really interesting, right? It's basically double down on what you're good at and kind of find ways to optimize where you spend your energy is really what it comes down to at like the highest level. So that I think is kind of in itself an interesting learning lesson. I thought that part was interesting anyway.
Yeah, I agree. I did like that part. And the where they had like employees pitch ideas at the end. I thought that was a cool thing that I think a lot of companies could learn from. So I know this was an earlier question, but yeah, I think there is value to people who are in that stage in their career or in a company culture like that to read this book. I think for me, like I think probably similar to Derek and some others, like I feel like obviously being at GitLab, like I'm not really concerned about some of these things anymore. So I'm looking for the next thing for me, I think. So that's why to Emily's question, like I'm not sure there's a clear action for me out of this book. So I think I'm looking for something else to like kind of, how do I take like what we're doing at GitLab and take that to the next level? And I don't think that book has been written yet, probably for good reason.
Is there something, Emily, you're planning to take away or?
Yeah, so I'd probably say that my biggest thing was the biggest thing that I got out of the Phoenix Project, because I wouldn't have read the Phoenix Project if I hadn't bought this, which is just like any gains gained anywhere other than the bottleneck are not gains, really. And so I've spent a lot of time thinking about that lately, like what is the bottleneck on this project or on this problem I'm trying to solve. Yeah, that one thing right there makes it worth the book, even though I'm kind of about it.
It might be a little bit of a stretch, but I don't think too much. I think that goes back to the core versus context, like in a way, like focus on the things that matter, essentially. That I forget which book it was, but I haven't read it in quite a few years. But it was talked about just that, like focusing on the bottleneck. That's going to move the needle versus these little things that barely move the needle. It's just go for the hard thing, kind of. So I have to figure out what book that was, but I just remember that now.
Yeah, so I'll mention too, I'm trying to think of where I have it, but I got The Goal when I bought these.
Awesome book.
So that's good to know, because now I might actually read it.
Yeah, so Phoenix Project forced me to go, well, not forced me, but because they referenced it in there, I was like, oh, let me go check this out. And I really enjoyed it. Um, Partially because I thought it was funny because you have to remember it was written like what in the 80s or something.
Yeah, I think it's 84.
So
So
not the
like
graphic novel.
so the technology in there, right? I mean, it's like, typewriters and like they're just getting certain systems. The author, Elijah Goldratt, he does a lot of consulting and was a big proponent for ERP systems. So the technology itself is not current, but it actually kind of makes it fun because you can see the culture there. They're like, yeah, we stayed up all night, like smoking cigarettes in the office and manually entering the data or something to that effect, right? There's just smoking cigarettes in the office as a reference, right? Like of the time.
And I think the fact is that if you can still read it now and still get value out of it, that probably shows how good a book it is. Because if it was written a long time ago and it's still of value, then.
And that's where I think the Unicorn Project is going to fail. It's going to drop. Is that like, I don't know that it's going to stand the test of time in the way like, okay, so this was written in 84. The Phoenix Project was written, 10 years ago? And like, when I read it last year, 2019, it was super useful to me. If I read this, that's going to be 30 years later, and it's still going to be 35 years later. It's still going to be useful, and 30 years. I don't think the Unicorn Project is going to have that same sort of longevity, but I think that's probably also just like a problem with sequels in general.
So the two versions of this book are like
Yes.
I was going to say, like the one you just linked, Ben, was like, I've not seen that.
Graphic novel. And then I think Emily has
There are no graphics in this one.
Yeah, I think they're written by this, or the message is the same thing, but I think this one was written in, the graphic novel was readapted in 2017 of the original one, I think.
That TLDR book or something?
Mark notes?
I don't know, it's like written in like a comic strip format, and I'm like kind of curious like if I should read this one.
I'll tell you what, I'll get that, read it, let you know what it's like, because I haven't got either copy. So, and if it's rubbish, then I'll just message Emily and ask her to ship that book halfway across the world.
So this one says required reading for Amazon's management on the bottom, in case that's a.
There we are.
Cool. I don't see that on the graphic novel. It's 330. It's not that many pages, but enough that it's a chunk of time.
It has a sticker on the front that says a business graphic novel.
Yeah, that really does it. I'm curious what other books along this like business fiction that tells a lesson or that has a lesson have y'all read?
I haven't read that many like on this thing recently. I've read some really interesting AI stuff recently. So things about superintelligence and sort of fictional theory books but based in reality in terms of like what would happen if machines got human level intelligence and stuff and the possible outcomes. And it's something that's pretty interesting.
My first introduction. Go ahead.
I just pasted in the chat the only one that I've read before this. It's like 110 pages. You read it in an afternoon. It's super fast. It's about time management. It was really good. Just want to put that out there.
Yeah, if you may recall, I didn't even know this was fiction when I first signed up for this. So I have not read. This is the first time I read a book like this. Like it's very rare that I'm reading a fiction book, which is a little bit sad, but it's just the way it is.
If you like business fables, Patrick Lencioni, I linked it in the second one, although it's kind of hard to click on that. He does like the 5 dysfunctions of a team, 5 temptations of a CEO. There's a bunch of those kind of things. Yeah, I think yeah. That was my first introduction to like business fiction, or like work fiction.
I have the book, but I haven't read it.
Yeah, I read it, I think, back in undergrad, so it's been a little while, but I do remember enjoying it. But how relevant it still is, I can't say at the moment. But I just bought the priorities one, so I'm looking forward to blowing through that one and seeing what's up.
Get you closer to your goal for the year.
For the decade.
Cool. Well, that's all I've got, folks. If we want to just wrap up a little
Yeah.
early, I appreciate y'all reading the book. Thanks, Ben, for organizing and putting all this together.
Yeah, thanks everybody for coming and attending. Wouldn't have been possible without y'all.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
I'll talk to everybody later.
Yeah.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.